All right. Well, welcome to Talking Trades. Good morning. We have the benefit and pleasure of having Stephen Bell, who is the pastor of Way of the Cross Baptist Church in McDonough, and with me, as always, is Randy Beal, who is the business manager for the Atlanta North Georgia Building Trades. And Stephen, we normally talk about issues in construction, sort of tactical issues in construction. But today I wanted to kind of change the conversation a little bit and talk about sort of the role of faith as it relates to this work in construction. And as I understand it from Randy, you worked in the trades. Why don't you kind of take me through, as an introduction, how you got from working in the trades to being the pastor of a Baptist church?
Well, thanks for allowing me to be a part of this today. I initially started off in the trades around 06, 07 with the IUEC. I did the apprenticeship with the Elevator Constructors Union and had been a part of the but the UAW with the Ford plant in Atlanta, and so had worked there until the plant closed down. And then when the plant closed, I had a mechanical background and a little bit of college around that, and have at the same time always worked, at least since May of 95, bivocationally with ministry as well. And so in May of 95, I was working as a youth pastor with Way of the Cross, which was Rock Cut Baptist at the time. And then around 99, the Lord called me to preach, and 2001, I became a bivocational associate pastor. And so there's been some parallels there as far as bivocational pastoring and working. And so
bilocational pastoring mean you would go to different churches, or
no secular job and being the pastor.
Okay,
yeah,
right.
By vocation.
So by vocation.
Yes.
Okay, sorry.
And so ended up passed the Elevator Constructors apprenticeship test and tested out with them. And so I had served for about 10 years as the associate pastor, and then our senior pastor resigned in March of 2011. And at that time, I was, working on elevators, and the opportunity opened up for me to be senior pastor of the church. And so I ended up, church voted me in. I turned in a notice, and that's how the road turned to, I guess, my real passion in serving the Lord and pastoring.
So almost like an apprenticeship in its own right, where you tutored under, you learned under.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because you were youth pastor.
Yes, sir.
At Rock Cut.
Yes, sir.
Which later became Way of the Cross. But similar to, I was kind of preaching at our teen church at Berean Baptist at the same time. He was probably over there, maybe a little bit different. But, something that Brother Stephen won't say that I will say is, being in the Elevator Constructors Union, they have to have a lot of knowledge, too, of a lot of different things. So he can actually fix anything you won't fix, Rod. He can do a little wiring. He can fix pulleys and machines and everything else. So even tear down a gun and put it back together again.
Well,
he's got it.
As a head pastor of a church, my guess is that you use some of those skills because everything rolls up to you, right?
Absolutely. Yes, sir. It's a blessing to know how to fix a few things.
So, Stephen, as a man of faith, how does sort of that role in sharing your faith or even expressing yourself on the job site, how has that changed, since you were in the trades, or has it?
I was sharing my faith on the job site and still now. And so, I couldn't imagine my life without the Lord, and it's equal. And I guess it's a little more laser focused now. But it's always been a part of my life.
Rut, let me throw this in. So, Brother Stephen, I know when I worked out, and even today, when I go out and do a business meeting and I pray before I eat, I don't make a spectacle of it, right? But I've noticed that when people go with me the second time, they'll just wait. And sometimes they'll even say, hey, do you want to pray? And I know on the construction job, construction workers are looked at a little bit differently by the public, if you will, right? We're rough and gruff and tough, and sometimes there's colorful language. How did you deal with that
Yeah.
without throwing it in their face? How did you deal with that as a Christian?
They just knew I was preacher man. That was my nickname on the
Yeah,
job.
preacher man. Yeah,
Everybody's got a good. I love the nicknames more.
Yeah.
than
They
anything.
knew. They just knew preacher man was a Christian, and he, I mean, it wasn't in their face, but I would try to witness. They knew there were things I wouldn't participate in. I mean, there'd be times where, hey, we're going here for a Christmas party, and y'all have a good time. I'm not going, and well, you're going to stay here and work. So be it. And then, preacher man, go home. You quit messing with us. And but they just always knew, and so a lot of times that can get you a little bit of extra. Whatever, but if you'll continue to live out your faith, eventually they'll respect it. And you also find that a lot of those who would seem to be the hardest will end up coming to you in times of trouble with things that they have real concerns in life, because they eventually they see you're genuine and real, and not that you're faultless by any means. It requires making a few apologies at times and things like that. But I've always, as best I know how, tried to live out my faith.
Did you ever find people apologize to you as soon as they say a curse word? I mean, I've had that happen to me, Rudd. It's kind of funny, and I'm like, look, you don't have to apologize to me, but if it bothers you, we can talk about that. It's kind of funny. Have you ever experienced that?
Absolutely. I've experienced that several times. I've even had, we were in the shack on building a job in Buckhead, and everybody had came down for lunch, and it was a big job. There was 18 or 20 elevator guys in there, and one guy's cussing up a storm and just going, and then another older guy, he gets up and cusses him and says, blankety blank blank, preacher man's in here, watch your language. And I'm just, you just have to smile, because in his, with his best intent in mind, he's trying to say, watch your mouth, and at the same time, he's doing the same thing. But yeah,
Right.
It's funny at
Why?
times.
Why is that? Why do? And I listen. I'm not going to sit here and look you in the face and tell you that I don't fire them off myself. I mean, unfortunately, for whatever reason, that got to be a habit, and I check myself as much as anything. But how did that become a thing? Like, how did that become a thing on the construction sites? Why do people?
You mean the language?
Yeah.
I think because somehow they think it makes them feel tougher. I
Yeah.
mean, it's not a lack of vocabulary. For some, it might be. But in reality, I mean, you go back to the 80s and Eddie Murphy, and to be funny, you had to have 4-letter words. And I think a lot of that carried over into construction in my time anyway, Brother Stephen. I don't know about you. It's shock value. And
then it becomes habitual. I mean, I've worked with guys, some of the greatest guys, I can still call them today, and every word out of his mouth, I mean, it was just a habit. It had become his communication, and it was, from the moment you got out of the truck in the morning until you left in the evening, it was one after another, and it was just, I think it was more habit for him than anything else.
yeah, and people are, it is funny how people go back and they're apologetic, to you, especially when they know, and it's not what you say, Rutt, it's what your walk is. Brother Steve, would you agree with that?
Absolutely.
I mean,
I'm hoping that's the case.
it is. I mean, people will watch you more than they'll listen to you. And so, and believe me, they're also going to be judgmental. Everybody's judgmental to a point. Let's get real on that. But, I mean, it's really up to God to judge, but we all do it. Yeah. But in reality if the preacher man slips up if he hits his thumb and just murmurs any word,
Right.
not a cuss word, it could be anything, all of a sudden, preacher man's backslid over here. You know what I mean? And so it's, I hate to say that Christians live to a higher standard, but we do, and we should.
Right.
I mean, we should lift up a standard for the people, the Bible tells us. And so, and what doesn't mean you got to throw it in people's face. I was at a game this past weekend at UGA and on Saturday, and there's a guy out there preaching, right? And I don't, that's great they're doing that, but I think in a way that can ward off a lot of people. It would be like you and I at a construction site yelling through a megaphone, then we set it down and go into work. I'd much rather just do it by how I act and how I talk and how I present myself on the job.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that speaks louder. I mean, I'm not against street preaching, but I don't know how effective it really is.
I had a friend and former minister Jim McCrae, who has his own church now called Overcome. He was in the Methodist system for a while, and his thing was they have to be ready to receive. You know, you can preach all day long. You can talk to people about your walk. You can do whatever, but they have to be ready to receive. If that made sense to me. I don't know how that sits in the Baptist vernacular or
Well,
not.
I think as a Christian on the job, when the Lord opens an opportunity where someone is ready to receive, that is the point where you move past lifestyle evangelism, right? You just look at me and see that I'm trying to live for the Lord and do right. And when I do wrong, I'll apologize. But when those ready to receive moments become available, those are the moments you open your mouth and share the truth and try to be an encouragement and, discuss spiritual things with somebody.
Right.
You said something earlier, and this podcast in particular, there'll be a portion of people in the trades that could care less. And I want to tell you though,
could care less
about this topic.
Yeah.
But there's a majority of people that, the construction trades have a lot of people of faith in it.
Oh,
now, maybe different denominations, and we could have a theological debate at another time, but a lot of people of faith, and you know that.
Amen.
You deal with it, right? And I was going to say this, the unions are different than the corporate world in a lot of respects. And I'm going to tell you, so I don't know this to be true, but I'm going to say there's a minority of corporate companies that start their meetings with shareholders and or CEOs with a pledge of allegiance that includes the words under God. Every union does that, by the way. Every meeting we have, we do that. The next thing we do is have prayer.
Yep. Every one of them. Trade I've ever been, and you deal with lots more trades than I do, but I've been, producing content and video and pictures and that sort of thing. And it doesn't matter what trade it is. Those are in fact, Union Sportsman Alliance, which is the outdoor group, that it raises money and encourages people to get outdoors and hunt and fish and that sort of thing. They do the same thing.
They're going to pray before they eat that meal.
In fact, I took a picture of the IBW guys last night with the flag in the foreground with their hand on their heart, and that story doesn't get told.
Yep.
What is it like in this sort of litigious society we have now? How do the employers handle that? How receptive are they to that on the job site, or are they trying to put the kibosh on any kind of faith talk?
I'm 10 years out now.
Yeah.
For 2011 full-time senior pastor, and so
did y'all have a Bible study or anything, Brother Stephen, when y'all were? Did you have one on the job?
Every once in a while.
Yeah.
So it just depended on the crew you had, and it was never anything official. It was just whoever wanted to participate. But often I was working with Christian guys, and those several times I was working with other preachers and things like that. And so it was never a topic that couldn't be discussed,
sure,
or brought up.
So when I worked for McKinney's Rut, every Friday at 5 a.m. we had a Bible study, and in the tenant mechanical division. And there would be 8 or 10 of us come in there, different faiths. There was a Mormon in there was a Methodist and several Baptists, and we just opened up the King James Bible and did a Bible study, and we did it every Friday morning, and we did it for 45 minutes, and that allowed everybody to get to the job. We'd start at 7 then. Well, we'd have to do it at 4 a.m. now to get to the job by 6, but it was not frowned upon by that employer, and we utilized their facility. We met at the company in a conference room, I'm glad we live in a country where we can still practice our faith. Absolutely. And that's a blessing. And so something Brother Stephen said earlier that I want to touch on is he said those same people that are rough and gruff and are say colorful language come to you. Talk about that. What do you were they struggling with marriage or what?
I worked with a gentleman years ago, and he did not like the fact that I was a preacher. He did not like the fact that I was a Christian, and I was never short with him or anything. He just, he made it pretty clear.
Is a fellow coworker?
Yeah, coworker, and he just, had no use for me because I was a preacher, and so we were never, never had a real problem, but he never had any time whatsoever to invest in me. And he ended up having a child, and his little boy had liver problems. And I was sitting one day at break, had a Bible, read a chapter or so, eat some lunch, take a nap. Was normal practice, and Rick came over and sat down beside me. He said, "Can I talk to you for a minute?" He said, "Could you pray for my son?" And so just instances like that to where it's, and so of course I just said, "Rick, I'd be glad to pray for your son, and what's going on." And so it was just another one of those instances where you could have walked in and only known this guy for 3 weeks and been trying to, I don't want to say cram your religion down his throat, but more so him just seeing you be consistent. And then when the time was right, those opportunities come open, and you have an opportunity to be able to share with somebody. And so he and I ended up, in the end of things, had a pretty good relationship, and he became a good friend. But it was through him hitting a difficult time in life. I know at other times, one elevator job, a beam fell over on an iron worker. Of course, we were in new construction, and so someone else got hurt on the job within just a moment or two after that. And so this guy was just in terrible pain, and we all kind of went over there, and somebody said, "Hey, preacher man, why don't you pray for this?" And so there are instances to where it kind of, flushes out, and they want to discuss or talk about something. But it's mostly one-on-one. Somebody hits a difficult time in their life, and then they, kind of approach you of, "Can you pray for me?" Or, "Can I talk to you about something?"
Well, and sorry, but
Well, I was just going to say,
go ahead.
It made me think of that Mike Tyson line. Everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth,
Right.
And life will do that to you.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
and Brother Stephen, if you don't mind, I mean, I think it'd be good for people to hear too. I mean, you faced your own tragedy.
Sure.
You and Miss Lynn, his wife. I mean, talk about that for a minute, because I think one thing, Rudd, about men in general, we're not, construction workers aside, especially, we don't like to show our vulnerable side, right? No. And we're not going to be weak, and we're strong and tough, and nothing bothers us, and I never am depressed, I'm never this, that, or the other. All of that is a fallacy, So anyway, you shared this guy's son's tragedy, but you have your own.
Sure. So in around 2000, we started I had a desire to have children, and so we were expecting a baby, had a miscarriage, and of course that's we're about 12 weeks along, and so often that's at least for me that's a difficult thing on a father, but a whole lot more difficult on a mother. And so that was one thing that we had kind of walked through. Well, about a year later, we were expecting, and had a daughter in. Her name was Grace, and she's a beautiful little girl, born June 6, 2002. At 3 months old, she had some health issues. She was diagnosed with leukemia, and so we went down the road of treatment and, wondering whether or not she was going to live, and had some pretty big difficulties at times in treatment, but we ended up, there were a time or two where we didn't think she was going to make it, and then so at about a year out, we finished treatment, and so you go into a maintenance phase, and so you get the year out in remission, and so you think things are great, and you kind of click your heels together and thank the Lord, and you're smiling, and everybody's high-fiving, and so she was in remission for a year and a month, and so I guess November 5th of 2004, a few weeks prior to that, we'd been suspicious she had had some issues, and so we kind of course, there's always in the back of your mind, you have a cancer diagnosis here, and if it's in remission for 5 years, you're cured, but we've only been a year, and as a matter of fact, a year and a month. And so long story short, she came out of remission. They gave her a month to live in November of 2004. And so, we sought count. We looked with John Hopkins and every kind of place you could go to, and all the children's hospitals, unlike adult hospitals, they're all consulting together anyway. They're on the same team if there's ever been a group of doctors on the same team. And so wasn't really much to offer her. We did palliative care. Hopefully we're trying to buy her the highest quality of life as long as she could have it. And pretty much I felt like if the Lord wanted to heal her, he could, and kind of tried to pick treatment that I would want myself. And my wife did the same way. We had peace about that. And so we tried to get her to Christmas of that year, and she ended up living a year and a month. And so she went through 2 Christmases. And then, so January 1st of '06, she passed away at 3.5 years old. While she was in that last year of palliative care, we ended up expecting another baby, a son. And so about 3 months into the pregnancy, going to a high-risk pregnancy doctor because of some different issues that have been discovered with Grace, then they did about an 1.5 hour ultrasound one day, and you're just kind of like, okay, just go ahead and tell me because this is not normal. And so he had a disease called Fanconi's anemia, and so he lived for 6 days. So he was born September 23rd of '05, and so he passed away 6 days after that. 3 months later, Grace passed away, and so that was when the world kind of stopped, and it was things were your faith just put in everything you've ever believed. You question, you go back to a foundation of, do I believe what I say I believe? And so the Lord was faithful. We kind of idled along for about a year. At about a year out, our marriage almost ended. It was just grief was terrible. Went through, we walked through some depression and different things like that. But God saw fit to put several people in our life that were just very pivotal. We ended up with a Christian counselor who had buried her 2 teenage daughters and her husband within about 6 months of each other, and that was years back. And so, tracks of a fellow struggler. Linda was a tremendous help to us, and then he put different people in our path. And so, I can say at this point, God has completely healed our hearts. I mean, I still miss my children. I still grieve them. That I still can't wait to see them in heaven. But, this far out, God has been faithful. He's healed us, and we've seen him take us through difficult times. And that wasn't a certain phrase from a counselor and then, everything's okay now, or a certain Bible verse or a certain sermon. That wasn't a certain, devotional or some group's grief material that we went. It was years of trying to stay faithful with the Lord and getting help. We obviously got help, and I'd encourage you, if you're struggling with depression, get help. Reach out. It's not, there's a lot of grief tools out there to be had. There's a lot of things to help you with grief or depression, and I learned a lot of hurts in life. Or whether it's grief, or whether it's a marriage, or whether it's a job loss, or whether it's a physical diagnosis of a health problem, a lot of those are just hurts, and there are a lot of tools that God can help you with to deal with your hurts in life. But he's been faithful, and he's helped us every step of the way.
And you got 2 children.
Absolutely. So in '08, we adopted a beautiful girl, Hannah. She was a week old, from Memphis, and then
She's taller than me now, right?
yeah.
She's
so that
13.
That doesn't take a lot, though.
No, it doesn't.
So we she's doing well, and then we have a son, Malachi, and he's
Adopted as well.
We adopted Malachi as well. So both of them. He's in the 2nd grade. She's in the 8th grade, and they're growing like weeds and having a good time.
That's awesome. Do you share that story with someone like the gentleman you were mentioning earlier? That it was so
Rick.
Stay out of my way, Rick.
Yeah.
Stay out of my way, preacher man. Like, do you share with that?
I would
when
have.
you get to that point.
Yes, and so that's it's a lot easier story to share this many years out than it was 2 years out.
Sure, absolutely.
Right? And so often our kids are the biggest ones to correct us, because you'll meet somebody, you say, are they bomb worthy? Can I drop this bomb on them? Can I really say this to them?
Yeah.
And so if we just met in Walmart and it's like, hey, how you doing? Oh, you got 2 kids? Yeah. All right, see you. Right. We're not going into that in the line at Walmart. And so anytime somebody asks how many kids we got, our kids are like, we got 5 kids, and it's, you got a miscarriage, you got 2 in heaven, you got us. And yes, we do. But, and so, be always glad to share that story. Always glad to use that. There was a point in our healing that we had finally went to a grief retreat at a place, and I have just recommended that organization to a dear friend that lost her husband, Patty, and it's called Spark of Life. They're an organization out of Colorado, and they do a tremendous job with grief and working with people who've had major losses in life. And so they had they had all their ducks in a row, if anybody ever has, and we went to a retreat there, and Lynn and I kind of were looking at each other going, we've heard all this, we've used all this, we have benefited from all these different things, pulled in from every direction, and so it was kind of at that time we said, you know what, we need to be sure we're using this to help others, and to, I believe it's in Second Corinthians 1, to comfort others with the comfort wherewith we ourselves are comforted of God. And so that, if I had to go through that, I don't want it to be wasted. I want to be able to use it as a benefit to somebody else, to be a help, to be an encouragement, to put an arm around. And so I can walk in a room and find out that you've lost a child. Well, there's an immediate connection. We both understand one another.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just instantaneous. And there's events that you've had happen in your life where you see that as well. And so often you gain more compassion than you've ever had in life for people going through real struggles, and you kind of get you get less tolerance for people who are, their life's about over because they got a hangnail today.
Yeah.
And so you really try to go and comfort those who are really hurting.
And to be able to give some perspective to the people who do have the hangnail.
Yes.
Yeah. And
Sure.
Something else is, so our son was diagnosed with cancer as a senior in high school, and he's fine. He's doing well now. He's 6.5 years. It's funny, the dates you remember, right? Cancer free. But you mentioned earlier, and I'm just trying to relate this to what you just said, is that, so Jonathan asked me, that's our son, when all this came about and he was about to have chemotherapy. I'll never forget it. We were at the church and he was about to start treatment, and I could tell he was emotional, about to, you can just tell, he's about to break down or something. So we go out on the front patio or the front of the church here where the two benches are, and, he has a moment, and his why me? We've done all we know to do, right? He's questioned Dad, right? It's like, we're church, Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, you served at Berean, we did this, that, all these things, why me? And the only answer that I didn't have one at the time, but as I prayed about it over the next few days, the answer is why not you?
Absolutely.
That's a hard thing to say to your son, but why not me? Or why not you?
Yep.
And what makes us so special that we don't think tragedy can happen in our life? That's a tough thing to take. But so how would you?
How did he handle that?
You know what? He understood. As a Christian, he got it. You know what? It doesn't mean that as a Christian you're not going to face persecution. Think about Christ. He went to the cross and died for sins that,
right,
not his own, ours.
Yeah.
So he got it. And he's a bright kid, but he got it. But he got it because he'd been raised in church, to be honest with you. But, Brother Stephen, how in this day and time today where COVID is what it is, and we've had our things at the church, and thankfully only one has passed away, but I'm sure Patty is the lady at church that lost her husband. I'm sure not just her, but she probably questions why my husband, and not that she's saying not yours.
Sure.
But there's guilt on the survivor too. Mm-hmm. Hey, I don't know what to say to her because I lived. I just got over COVID. What do I say to her because I lived through COVID and her husband didn't?
I think that's probably one of the biggest. You don't have to say anything to her. You have to let her know that, you know what, I don't understand this either, and this puzzles. I'm mind boggled. This is breaking my heart, and I don't understand it. But I just want you to know I'm your friend, and I'll be here with you.
Yeah.
I will empathize. I will walk. You're going to look up, and everybody else may be gone. I'll still be walking with you, and I'm willing to come in and step into your grief and step into your difficult time, and not try to fix it because I can't fix it. Nobody can fix that. It's a huge loss. It's life changing. Everything that you do is different. For us, we went from a home that had a child in it who was everywhere. She was also a child with medical needs. And so that was very demanding. And so everything you had wadded your life up into had, all of a sudden, it was just gone. And now it was silence and crickets chirping. And it's like, I don't even know what to do with yourself anymore. And so you have that role for my wife, who had become not only a mom, but a full-time health caregiver.
Yeah.
It's just, there's nothing now. And so you kind of redefine who you are. But coming alongside somebody, you just go in and sit down with them and say, I don't know how to fix this. I'm so sorry for your loss, and I want to be here with you. You won't be able to shake me.
Right.
From that experience, how do you, if you're on the job site, you're working with these men and women all the time. You spend more time with the people you work with than your family a lot of times. Sure. What was some things that people said to you that were comforting and not, they didn't seem kind of flippant, but everybody feels, oh man, the moment you start to go, you're going about your life and you find out somebody you work with had a tragedy happen, it makes you go, oh wow, I didn't really look at that perspective. What sort of things did people say to you on the job or anywhere really that comforted you, and what can people in that situation do when they find out they're working with somebody that's had a tragedy like that? What can they say that brings healing and comfort to the other person?
I think one of the biggest things is don't back away from them, don't ostracize them, and don't ignore their loss. Even though it's hard, because a lot of people are like, well, I just can't talk about that because it's too hard. It's like, oh my goodness, think about how hard it is for them.
Yeah.
Right? And so they just buried their husband. They just buried their child. And so don't you dare say it's too hard for you.
Yeah.
I mean, it is hard for you, inconvenient for you at work or whatever, but you care enough about those people to say, look, I'm so sorry for your loss, and I'm praying for you. And
don't assume they don't want to talk about it.
Exactly. I'll tell people a lot as a pastor, especially if they're going through a really difficult time. If you need somebody to talk to, or if you need somebody to do all the talking, we'll go have coffee.
Yeah.
We'll go sit down, and whichever way and if it's a mix of both, that's fine. But there's often times to where I just need somebody to do all the talking. Just sit down and you just go after it for a while, and then I'll tear up a little bit and we'll move forward. And but it's beneficial. I say the biggest thing is don't back away. We had friends who never backed away. And
that's a blessing.
That is critical in somebody healing. You can't. And there were plenty of people who backed away, and I don't hold grudge against them in any way, but there were a lot of folks who had been really close friends who just vanished, and there were others that you couldn't shake, and the ones that you couldn't shake, those are memorable.
And a lot of times, those that back away think that you need space. In reality, you need to be surrounded.
Yep.
And you might even get a little agitated. I know, and when Jonathan was going through that, people, even in the church, they surround you, right? I mean, we've been a part of a couple of ministries that just love people. And that's what I'd say about Way of the Cross. We just love people. Where if you want to get loved on, you come to the church. But that can be aggravating.
Yeah.
But I'd rather somebody say, "Hey, I need a moment," than to never have me be there and then be able to say that. So, when at Sheep Metal, when I was over there, we had a program that we started called MAP, Members Assistance Program, and we never talked about these kind of things. It was a taboo to talk about people have problems and difficulties. And I know Brother Stephen going to work during that period, it's by the grace of God you didn't get yourself hurt or someone else, because there's no way your mind was always 100% focused.
Absolutely.
No way.
And when you're on a construction site, that can be dangerous.
It can be. It can be. And that's this program that we developed is recognizing when someone that you're working with is not in their right state of mind, and it could be 100 million things, right? It could be a dependency issue all the way to depression, or him and his wife just got in an argument before they left home, right? It could be anything. But then how to handle that and then get to them to the right kind of help
Stephen,
is important.
This is going to sound like a stupid question, but is there any difference in the way you would counsel somebody who has something tragic like that medically? That really was no fault of the child or the adult or whatever. Cancer's terrible. We've all had somebody that we love pass away from it. But versus something like that's, I won't say self-inflicted, because that's a not a very compassionate way to look at it, but something like
a dependency,
drug addiction,
issue.
And I mean, and I don't have to tell you guys, it's a big time problem, and it can. And the drugs they have now, will sweep you out like that.
Well, and let me
people
say,
lose children.
Before you answer that, it's not necessarily always alcohol and illegal drugs. The biggest problem is opioids.
Yeah.
100%. Number one prescribed drug in any health and welfare plan in the unions is opioids. But how do you do? What's the difference in that? That's
Yeah.
your question, right?
Yeah. Is there any, I mean, the loss of a child or a loved one is the loss of that person, whether they were medically afflicted or whether they brought it upon themselves, so to speak,
But somebody who's on drugs is lost too. I mean, they're lost to their family. They're, I mean, it may be a different kind of loss. They can be coming back. But how do you speak to somebody did you know anybody that you worked with that had an issue, dependency of any kind?
You have to.
Yeah.
I mean, you're not in construction long before you.
Any trade, really, anything.
This person fails a drug test, or
Sure.
So I mean, I think that level is often as people are functioning, and so that's So as far as how do you deal with somebody who has a drug addiction on a job? I mean, I think you work with them as best you can. In a danger scenario, I don't think you can tolerate it. You have to make it known. I mean, if we're building an elevator and you're pulling rails for me in the hoistway, you're not going to be taking drugs and
Right.
be dangling that over my head.
Right.
So in that light, I think but if you're dealing with somebody who has a loss, let's say someone's family member overdosed on drugs,
Right.
I think I'm just as compassionate towards them as I am towards somebody who had a car wreck or
Cancer or anything.
or even if they had a family member who was suicidal. I think I'm maybe even more compassion because there's more than just the loss. There's the idea that this loss didn't have to happen, or maybe we could have prevented it, or
And the process of watching someone destroy themselves.
sure, it's awful.
Let's say that I'm a person on the job and I was raised possibly in a church. A lot of grandmamas and mamas did that, or daddies, but maybe I'm not going now, right? I'm out of the faith, so to speak, and I've got problems. How do I find help? And what would you say to somebody that's listening? How do you take that first step? And who do you reach out to?
That's a great
I mean, I know they
question.
could reach out to you.
Sure.
And we're going to give you contact information if that's okay.
Absolutely.
To the level you want us to do that. But I mean, what advice do you give, and what does that look like, and how confidential is it?
Well, it's definitely confidential. I mean, unless there's a physical harm kind of scenario or somebody's
Sure.
abusive, then we're be a mandatory reporter on some of those things. But I mean, if you're struggling with addiction and you, so I'd say there's twofold. The Lord's always at the center of everything that has helped me, and there's been plenty of times when I've been mad at the Lord. When my kids died, I wasn't very happy with God at that time.
Yeah.
Sure.
And be honest, and be honest with God. He already knows anyway, right? I believe He's discerner of the thoughts and intents of the heart. And so, but if anybody's struggling, number one is, do you know Christ as your Savior, and do you have a personal relationship with Christ? And so, I would think that'd be the best place to start. Now, if they, like you said, Randy, are out of church, away from the Lord, then I'm obviously going to try to say, hey, there's a loving family here who will help you and try to support you, and we'll try to get you the help you need in order to get right back on the right path. And I ask a lot of folks when they're just kind of like, and I'm like, well, what you're doing now, how is that working out?
Yeah.
And I look back at the times where I try to fix myself, and most of the time I wasn't very successful at things.
Yeah.
And it was the grace of God and helpers in my life. And, there's a lot of people who have a lot of ability. I mentioned that one group, Spark of Life, with grief. And we heard a lot of things from them that we had already heard bits and pieces from other places. And so there's a lot of counselors out there to be had. There's a lot of counseling. I'd say probably 80% of the counseling today is biblically based, whether they realize it or not.
Yeah.
A lot of the truths in it
Really?
come from Scripture. I mean, there's, places in the Bible where God's people are depressed, and God gives them basically, here's how to get yourself out of that. Now, not in a flippant, this is just all you got to do, but I mean, there's a lot of scripturally based patterns that are out there that work, and that's why they're being used even in a secular world, because these things are effective.
I was going to
I'm
ask you.
encouraged to hear you say that, because I worry about the other side of things. When my children or anybody that I know, and I greatly believe in therapy. I believe in sort of if if nothing else, helping you cleanse yourself of and get those problems out in front of you so you can sort them out. And, you know, what does Scripture say about it? What does tradition say about it? What does history say about it, et cetera? And I'm glad to hear you say that, because I worry about the postmodern world of, you know, nothing means anything, and, you know, everything's a
no right or
prescription
wrong.
here. Hell, you know, well, you're feeling this way. Well, here's a pill, take it, you know, instead of really like drilling down to the, why do I feel this way? Why am I doing this?
Yeah. And I think there's a place for the counselors with all the initials behind their name. I think there's a place for them in addition to a place for pastoral or a ministry counseling. I think there's, look, God can handle anything, and He can handle everything. But I also think that there's times when you need both.
I agree 100%. Now, when we went through our grief of our two children within 3 months, a 6-day-old and a 3.5-year-old, our pastor, he did his best. I love him. He's with the Lord now. He was one of my dearest friends. So he walked with us through that time, but he didn't know what to do with us. And so he gave us biblical counsel. But I always look at it this way, and I learned this lesson. If you are in a situation, let's say on the job site, and somebody comes to you and they have an issue that's you're not trained and you don't know how to handle. Now, you love on them, you be there for them, you stay with them, especially if they're suicidal. You know, you make sure you're with them. And a lot of suicide, from a lot of what I've studied, is pain relief. You don't think it's going to get any better, and you just want pain relief. And so you stay there with them, and you get them the help they need. Don't just say, hey, we're going to have a word of prayer over here, and it'll be all right. We're going to trust. Well, we are trusting the Lord to fix this, but so I always relate that, and we learned this lesson through our grief and counseling with our pastor at the time, and he recommended we go to other counseling. Well, love somebody enough to get them to a professional.
Yeah.
Rudd, if you were to fall and to scrape your arm on the edge of this table, well, we get the first aid kit, get you a Band-Aid, and try to help you. But if you were to fall and, God forbid, you break your leg and the bone be sticking out, well, we would do you a great injustice to get you Band-Aids and help you to your car and send you on the road. We would want to, no, we're going to help you, but we're also calling professionals at the time. And so I highly recommend get help. It's out there.
And I don't mean to suggest that you know, the psychiatric world is not valid.
Sure.
I don't mean that at all.
I knew that.
You know, I feel like, you know, like it's a chemistry problem at some level. If you have diabetes, or if you have a imbalance in your sugar, that's a chemistry problem. You know, you eat things that, you know, you ingest things that are not going to compound that problem. I'm not suggesting that, but I'm just saying that just that, you know, that
I
chemistry
think
problem only.
Appeal's not always the answer.
And something else too is, don't be fooled by people who you don't think have a problem. You know what I mean? In other words, I mean, I'll share that. I'm probably the least likely person you think could be on medication for anxiety and depression.
Yeah.
But I take it.
Right.
So it's just, it helps me. You know, and I'm probably one of the happiest people you can be around.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that I don't have issue. It doesn't mean I don't have something I need to take, you know. So it's okay to admit that. It's okay to be in that situation. Doesn't mean I have less faith in someone else. It just means that I process things a little differently than you do.
Yeah.
And so I have help with that.
Yeah.
And I think for our guys out on the job and our ladies out on the job, you know, that member assistance program I talked about, part of that's what Brother Stephen just said. I couldn't help them. I could help them from a biblical standpoint, and I did at the best of my ability. But my real job was to get them to the right person to help them. And I'm not a counselor, right? So that's what our job was. And you're 100% right. You know, don't try to fix something. Don't tell me how to raise kids if you ain't never had a kid.
Yep.
So if I've never contemplated suicide, I don't need to be trying to talk you out of it. Now I need to give you support, help, and get you to somebody.
So we're sitting here behind our, you know, devices all 24/7 all the time. Is there some sort of have you seen in your experience some good resources for people that might not be at the place where they want to talk to somebody, you know, but that existential problem is bubbling up in their soul, and they you know, some good online resources that you've pointed people to?
For
just for dealing with things like depression, some tragedy in their life that's happened, et cetera, that they're not yet willing to talk to someone, but they know they need.
Often I would point them maybe to a certain message or something that we've used at the church, and usually I would try to, can I email you some scripture? Can I point you to a website or two? And don't really have that off the top of my head right now, but most of the time that's on someone on an individual basis. Hey, give me a call, and we'll find you some direction. And often it's obviously going to be a different help for somebody who's 70 versus somebody who's 22. Mm-hmm. Or I mean, there might be an app somewhere that we're going to recommend for somebody who's 22 years old. That's, and it's probably going to be coffee and lunch with somebody who's 70, and sit down and take them something in print. And so a lot of times we've got to be a little bit flexible with an audience there. But I think a certain level of personal interaction, like you said, I can't fix you, but I can recommend. And then don't pull away thinking, wow, I'm done with that.
Yeah.
Follow up, check on, love on, care for, and that's probably some of the harder things. Is and I would say if you're going through struggles and difficulties and grief work or depression, that's hard work. That is some of the most exhausting work that you ever do, is try to work through those emotional problems, because at the end of the day, you're exhausted and you usually don't have anything tangible to show for it. Now, if we go out and you guys do a sheet metal project or we build an elevator, then we have something we can see at the end of the day. We're worn out, but we did this.
Right.
And often when you do emotional work, grief work, depression work, you're spent, probably more tired than you've ever been, and for some reason you don't see tangible things, and it's a very frustrating thing to try to heal up from that as well, because it's hard to put hands on, have I had any healing? And so I encourage you, one time, two times. This is months of time. This is sometimes it's not just I'm going to go to the next day. I'm going to go to the next hour.
Right.
And I'm going to make it through the end of the day, and then I'm going to do this, and looking for some short-term goals. But in the end, I'm not looking for I said it earlier, a quick fix, but somewhere, 6 months from now, I promise if you'll do a lot of the things and follow the patterns that have been laid out, you'll look back and go, I don't know how it happened. And I say that in our grief journey, I don't know how it happened, but God has healed our hearts. And I can't put an exact tangible timeline on when it happened. I just know it has unfolded. Mm-hmm. And so that makes it very difficult at times, because we're so, well, if I can just make it till next 3 weeks from now, we go on vacation.
Right.
And so that's our mindset often. But in this work with depression or grief or difficulties or addiction struggles, it's harder to put hands around progress.
It suffices to say you have to be willing to deal with it to begin with.
Yes.
If when you have time, if you'll put together some scripture verses and some places that you talked about, online help or whatever, if you'll get those to me, we'll post them on our website, and I'll encourage all the other unions to do the same thing. We need a place for our members to go to, or if you're dealing with depression, anxiety, or health or whatever, here's some help.
That's what I was talking about.
I think we need a place to go
with the online stuff, because, like when you say, "Well, call this number," there are some helplines. It's like, that's intimidating.
Sure,
man.
it is.
It is.
Hey, thank you for calling such and such man. Who's I'm going to dump all my problems with somebody on the other end of the line. It's like, I'd rather sift through some things to read.
Who, by the way, is paid to listen to you.
Yeah,
it's almost a disconnect there. I mean, I'm not saying that's a bad system.
It's intimidating.
It's intimidating, and it's not personal enough.
Yeah, and if you're working on the job site all day, you're tired at the end of the day.
Right.
You're not always at a place where you're ready to deal with it during the hours in which they're.
But just having scripture verses and places that we could point people, and then a contact at the end of the day. I mean, we've talked about it at trades. I've talked to Brother Stephen about this. When I was at Sheet Metal, I acted as the chaplain for the building trades, and wasn't utilized a lot. Unfortunately, I say unfortunately because I know people had problems, right? But that's where I want to get back to, is where we actually have someone, whether Brother Stephen or someone else, that is there for people, not because they're a member of Way of the Cross, not because they're X, Y, or Z, but because he loves people and wants to help minister to people that are having troubles.
Yeah,
or whoever it may be. We need that in the trades.
for sure.
And I'll encourage you too, if you are at the place where I need to go find a website and you probably need to talk to somebody.
Yeah,
Yeah.
You need, and often for men, construction, we can fix anything. There's going to be some things one of the things that I guess probably helped me come through grief and some depression the most is I can't fix this. This is beyond me. I don't have the ability, and you need the help. And so I just encourage you, and I'm not saying don't use a website, don't use resources,
Right.
but if you're there, if you've went that far, then you probably need to get somebody personally involved in your life who's been there and who can love on you and help you, because let's face it, if we're searching it out, it's probably bad.
yeah. On the job site, are there people you kind of know that, hey, that might be a guy that I would turn to, and how do you get that word out without being seen as proselytizing, so to speak?
I knew. I mean, you knew on the job. I'm sure you did too. You said you had pastor friends or either people that were in the church. There's a commonality. You find it out pretty quick, and you find out those that are genuine and those that are giving a little bit of lip service. The words "I'll pray for you" means you'll actually pray for them, right? And it's not just. I mean, Brother Steve and I may text sometimes 5 times a week. It may be one time in 3 weeks, right? But when he asks me to pray for something, I'm going to pray for it,
Right.
and I know he knows that, and I know the same goes back to him. When I ask him, it's going to happen, and so you recognize those people on the job.
Absolutely. And I think if you're one of those folks on the job and somebody says, hey, could you pray for me about this? Well, stop and do it.
Yeah,
I mean, right there. Just, hey, let's take 30 seconds and let these people know I'm actually going to do this, and we'll start now. And I think that investment in somebody allows them to know. And like you said, though, I've had people on the job that actually worked with a gentleman for a while, and then power went down in the building. We were running on Tyrek motors in the hoistway. And so we were able to step off on a floor around the 26th floor of a building. We walked out, and I just asked him, I said, hey, I said, do you go to church anywhere? And he hung his head down. He said, you'd have no way of knowing, would you? And he, just his talk, his life, he never said anything about it. He said, I taught Sunday school last week. And, so some of those guys were out there. And if that's you, get some things in order. Somebody might need your help. And there's no telling who's hinging on and if you treat, I'd say for a lot of folks, I've heard it years ago, if you treat most people like they're hurting, you probably treated them right, because people don't come in and say, oh, I'm hurting today. And especially a bunch of guys, we're all doing good. But care enough about people to learn people. And if you see a drastic change in their behavior, their pattern or anything, then love them enough to say, hey man, you doing okay? And, can I help you? Can I pray for you about something? Can I, and you'd be surprised at times that, what you might find out. I've posed that question before, and me and so were having marriage troubles, and and it's kind of like, it's obvious to everybody. You're mad. You're slinging tools. You're you're a different person right now, and so I guess love folks enough to try to invest in them.
But people knew they could come to you. You're a preacher man.
Sure.
What I heard from that story, though, Rut, is don't be afraid to let people know that you're of faith, right? You don't know. There are people that will open up to Stephen that won't open up to me, but there's people that will open up to me that will not talk to him.
yeah.
And that's everybody. Everybody's that way.
Oh, well, the challenge that I would have with that is, how am I worthy to give you counsel on anything? You know what I mean? Like, I think there's a lot of people that think that.
Well, I think the word counsel is stretched to meaning medical, counsel. I mean, just listening is counsel. I mean, really.
Well, and in these people, let's say, who am I to give counsel to anybody? If we were to have a stack of doors over here and they're going to fall on me, I don't care who helps me get them off of me.
That's a good point.
And so if you have some counsel, I mean, you have some counsel, you have some
We've all been
common
through
sense
something.
and
You've been through
reason,
something,
and
yeah.
don't run down that hallway, the fire alarm's going off. We should not take an elevator 'cause they're going to don't wait on the elevator, let's hit the stairs. And so you have something to offer. You bring something to the table, and that's something a lot of people who are depressed often lose sight of is they are valuable. They bring something to the table. They matter.
Yeah.
And so, and you as a helper,
Yeah.
you matter. And if they're there, and if the Lord's put that opportunity in front of you, walk through the door and take it and help them. Maybe they're about to go under on the load, and you might be the one to prop it up for a minute.
And it might be just sharing the grace people have when they're faced their final few days. I think about Ed. You know, I mean,
Friend of ours who
friend of
passed away
ours.
of
Yeah, I
cancer.
mean, you know, it wasn't filled with fear. You know, it's what I've heard. I mean, you know, it's filled with grace, and so
Yeah.
we all have a story to tell, whether it's about us or about someone else. You know, I happen to have a story to tell about my son and myself, and Brother Stephen can talk about his children, but everybody in this room has a story. Everybody listening has a story that can help someone else.
Stephen Bell, thank you so much for joining us. There's so many other avenues that I would love to go down. I'd love to get you back and dive into some specific subject matters because there's a lot of things going through my head. But for people who want to get in touch with you, want to get in touch with your church, tell them how they can get in touch with you.
It's Way of the Cross Baptist Church. We're at 1640 Mount Carmel Road, McDonough, Georgia. You can give us a call. I can get Randy some contact info to put out there, maybe on your site.
I'll
how
put
you
it in
get
the
a hold
notes,
of me, and we'd be honored to try to talk to you, try to help, try to be an encouragement. Or I mean, if you're looking for a good church home, or you got any questions about the Lord, come see us. And that's, you know, Randy said we're a church that loves people, and if anybody really loves God, that's what God's all about. God loves people. I tell people all the time, he took one chapter of the Bible to describe the world and space and how it all got here, and the whole rest of the book's about people. And so that's what he's really about, is about people. And so, but yeah, we'd be honored to try to be a help and encouragement, and we'll get some contact info out there to connect to this, and we'd look forward to talking to you. Thanks for having me, and I'd be honored to come back anytime.
Randy, thank you.
Thank you.
Stephen, thank you.
Thank you, Ruck.